Cale stood in the shadows of his grand crystal chamber, watching his young son Peter struggle with the dance steps. The boy's claws scraped against the polished floor, and his movements were clumsy and uncoordinated. Cale felt a familiar frustration rising in his chest. The family had a reputation to maintain. Dragon nobility required grace, refinement, and perfect execution of every movement. Peter was failing, and it pained Cale to witness his heir's weakness. The billionaire dragon merchant had built his enormous fortune through decades of shrewd business dealings across the galaxy. He controlled trade routes, owned mining operations on 7 different planets, and had investments in technologies that shaped civilizations. Yet his greatest ambition was to see his son become a worthy successor to the family legacy. How could Peter inherit such power if he could not even master the basic movements of dragon nobility? Cale's claws clicked impatiently against the marble as he observed from behind one of the tall pillars that supported the chamber's ceiling. The afternoon light streamed through the massive windows, casting long shadows across the dance floor. Peter's tutor had abandoned him an hour ago, declaring the boy hopeless and requesting a reassignment. Cale was considering the request when something unexpected happened. Eleanor, his human maid, stepped forward from where she had been quietly working in the corner of the chamber. She was a young woman with kind eyes and an unusual way of moving that suggested she understood something about rhythm and balance that most creatures did not. Before Cale could stop her, Eleanor approached Peter and spoke softly. "Young master, may I try something different?" she asked, her voice gentle and respectful. Peter looked at her with surprise, then at his father's hidden position, uncertain whether this was allowed. Eleanor smiled warmly and began to move slowly, demonstrating the first position with her human body. There was something beautiful about the way she carried herself, something that made even the complicated movements seem simple and natural. What happened next made Cale pause his impatient clicking. Peter began to follow Eleanor's movements, and for the first time that day, the young dragon's face showed genuine joy instead of frustration. Eleanor did not criticize or demand perfection. Instead, she moved alongside Peter, counting the rhythm in a soft, musical voice. She celebrated each small improvement, each moment when Peter's feet found the correct position. Cale remained hidden, watching this unexpected scene unfold. Eleanor taught Peter for nearly 2 hours, and the young dragon grew more confident with each passing minute. The maid never showed anger or disappointment. She simply continued, patiently and kindly, helping Peter understand that dancing was not about rigid perfection but about feeling the music and moving with joy. When they finally stopped, Peter was breathing heavily but smiling broadly. "You are a natural teacher," Peter said to Eleanor, his voice filled with genuine appreciation. "You are a wonderful student," Eleanor replied. "You just needed to understand that learning is a journey, not a destination." After Eleanor led Peter away to rest, Cale emerged from behind the pillar. He found himself thinking about this human woman who worked in his household. He knew very little about her, really. She had arrived at his estate about 6 months ago, recommended by an employment agency that specialized in human workers. She was polite, efficient, and had never caused any problems. Most dragons barely noticed their human servants. They were simply part of the background like furniture or tools. But Eleanor was different. That night, as Cale walked through his fortress making his usual rounds before sleep, he noticed something unusual. A light was on in the servants' quarters and Eleanor was still awake despite the late hour. Through a small window, Cale caught a glimpse of her holding some kind of device that glowed with soft blue light. She was speaking in hushed tones, her voice urgent and serious, nothing like her kind manner with Peter. Cale's curiosity turned to suspicion. He moved closer, trying to hear what she was saying, but her words were too quiet. The device in her hand looked like it could be some kind of encrypted communication system. Cale had seen similar technology before, but only among high-level operatives and spies. What would a simple human maid be doing with such equipment? He watched as Eleanor looked around nervously, then accessed something on a hidden panel in her room. Files appeared on the wall screen, files that looked exactly like the classified records from his private database. His heart began to race. How had she obtained access to restricted information? The security systems should have prevented any unauthorized access. Cale quickly withdrew, moving silently back toward the main chambers. His mind was spinning with questions and concerns. Eleanor had seemed so genuine, so kind, so different from the human servants he had known before. She had treated Peter with real affection, not the cold detachment that most servants displayed. But if she was accessing his private files, then perhaps all of that kindness was an act, a disguise for something much more sinister. He thought about the young dragon's bright smile as Eleanor taught him to dance. He thought about the genuine warmth in the maid's voice when she spoke to Peter. Could someone who showed such kindness to a child be involved in something criminal? Or was Cale simply being naive, allowing himself to be fooled by an attractive appearance and a gentle manner? Cale made his way to his private study and sat in his comfortable chair, staring out at the galaxy beyond his windows. Somewhere out there, among the stars and planets and trading stations, there were forces working against him. There were always such forces when one had accumulated as much wealth and power as he had. But he had never expected to find danger hiding in his own household, wearing the face of someone who had shown nothing but kindness to his son. He made a decision. Tomorrow he would confront Eleanor and demand answers. He would discover exactly what she was doing with his files, who she was communicating with, and what her true purpose was in his home. Whatever her explanation, Cale knew that his trust had been shattered. The woman he had begun to see as different, as special, had revealed herself to be something else entirely. Something that could threaten everything he had built. Cale did not sleep that night. He sat in his study, accessing the security logs on his personal computer. His fingers moved quickly across the holographic interface, pulling up records of Eleanor's movements throughout the fortress over the past 6 months. What he discovered made his blood run cold. Eleanor had visited his private database room at least 40 times. Each visit was carefully timed to avoid the security guards. She had accessed files related to dragon cartels, genetic research, and something labeled Project Harmony. Cale knew about Project Harmony. It was a classified government program that involved the collection and modification of human genetic material. The official story was that it was for scientific advancement. But Cale had heard rumors in the upper circles of dragon society. Rumors about weaponization. Rumors about creating a controlled population of enhanced humans who could be used as soldiers or workers without free will. By morning, Cale had made his decision. He could report Eleanor to the Dragon Council security force. They would arrest her, interrogate her, and likely execute her for espionage. It was the logical choice, the safe choice. But something held him back. He thought of Peter's smile. He thought of Eleanor's kindness. And he wanted to hear her explanation first. Cale waited until Peter left for his morning lessons. Then he summoned Eleanor to his private study. He watched through the security camera as she made her way through the corridors, her face showing no sign of concern or fear. She knocked politely on his door and entered when he called out. "Good morning, sir," Eleanor said, her voice carrying that same warmth it always did. "Is there something you need?" Cale studied her face carefully, trying to read whether she was genuinely innocent or simply an excellent liar. "Close the door," he commanded, his voice colder than usual. Eleanor obeyed, and Cale saw a flicker of concern cross her face. She sensed that something was wrong. Cale activated the privacy shield around his study, which prevented any electronic signals from entering or leaving the room. He also activated the visual blocker so that security cameras would see only static. "Who are you?" Cale asked directly. Eleanor's face went pale. She opened her mouth as if to speak, then closed it again. The act dropped away. Cale could see it happening in real time. The gentle maid disappeared, and something harder and more focused took her place. "I am Eleanor Price, captain in the Terran Hegemony's Advanced Intelligence Division," she said quietly. There was no point in lying now. "My mission was to embed myself in dragon households and gather intelligence on trafficking operations and genetic research programs." Cale felt his worst fears confirmed. Yet he still asked the question that mattered most to him. Was anything real? Your kindness to Peter? Your care for him? Eleanor's expression softened slightly. "Everything I did with Peter was genuine. I have no reason to lie about that now. The boy is innocent and kind. Teaching him brought me joy. But my duty to my people supersedes my personal feelings." "Your people are being enslaved," Cale said, and it was not a question. He had read enough of his own files to understand the scope of what was happening. Project Harmony is not about scientific advancement. It is about creating a subspecies of humans who can be controlled. It is about erasing their free will. Eleanor nodded slowly. "You know more than most dragons. Yes, humans are being taken from their homes. They are being held in facilities where their genetic material is harvested. Their children are being born in laboratories instead of families. The program is designed to eliminate what they call genetic defects, things like our capacity for independent thought, our desire for freedom, our ability to resist authority." Cale felt something shift inside him. He had built his fortune by participating in systems he had never fully questioned. He had accepted the official stories. He had not wanted to know the truth because knowing would require him to do something about it. Now the truth was staring him in the face in the form of this human woman who had been spying in his home. "What will you do?" Eleanor asked. "Will you turn me in?" Cale was surprised by the question. He could see that Eleanor was prepared for capture, even for execution. She showed no fear because she had already accepted her fate. This realization struck him deeply. She had known that discovery was possible, even likely, and she had continued her mission anyway. That was true dedication to something larger than herself. "I need to know everything," Cale said finally. "I need to know what Project Harmony is, who is running it, and how deep the conspiracy goes. I need access to the information you have gathered." Eleanor's eyes widened in surprise. "You want to help me?" "I want to understand first," Cale replied. "Then I will decide what to do." Eleanor spent the next 6 hours telling Cale everything. She explained how humans were being removed from their communities. She described the facilities where genetic modifications were performed. She revealed the names of high-ranking Dragon officials who were involved in the program. She showed him files that she had secretly copied from his own database and transmitted to her handlers. Each piece of information made Cale feel sicker. The most disturbing revelation came near the end. Eleanor explained that the genetic modifications were not random. They were specifically designed to create humans who were physically stronger but mentally weaker, more obedient and less capable of independent thought. In essence, Project Harmony was attempting to turn humans into a different species, one that could never rebel, never challenge Dragon authority. "My people are planning an uprising," Eleanor said quietly. "They are preparing to fight back. But we need proof. We need evidence that can be presented to the galactic community, something so undeniable that even the conservative dragons cannot dismiss it. If we can expose this program, we can stop it." Cale stood and walked to the window looking out at the city below. Thousands of dragons lived their lives, enjoying their wealth and power, never thinking about the humans suffering in hidden facilities. He had been one of those dragons. And now he had to make a choice that would define everything that came after. "Help me," Cale said without turning around. "Teach me how to gather this evidence properly. Then together we will expose them." Eleanor was silent for a long moment. Then she said, "You understand what this means? You will lose everything. Your fortune, your status, your place in Dragon society." "I understand," Cale replied. "But I cannot unknow what I now know. And I cannot face my son knowing that I allowed this to continue." For 3 weeks, Cale and Eleanor worked together in absolute secrecy. They gathered documents, recorded conversations, and compiled evidence that proved the existence of Project Harmony and the involvement of the Dragon Council's highest officials. Eleanor transmitted copies to her handlers in the Terran hegemony, but they kept the most damaging files hidden on encrypted devices that only Cale and Eleanor could access. The problem was that they could not move fast enough. Information about their collaboration was beginning to leak. Cale noticed suspicious activity in his security systems. He saw unfamiliar dragons arriving at his fortress late at night. He realized that someone knew what he and Eleanor were doing, and that someone was not happy about it. That someone turned out to be Vex, a rival dragon merchant who had always resented Cale's superior business skills and greater wealth. Vex had built his own fortune through less honest means, and he had connections to the Dragon Council's security apparatus. One morning, Vex arrived at Cale's fortress with a small team of security guards. He dismissed them to wait outside and entered Cale's private study alone. "I know about your little spy," Vex said, his voice dripping with satisfaction. "I know about the files you have been gathering. I know about your plan to expose the council." Cale's heart sank. Everything he had feared was coming true. But he kept his expression neutral. "What do you want?" "Simple," Vex replied, settling into a chair across from Cale's desk. "You have 2 choices. First, you can execute Eleanor yourself and make a public statement declaring that humans are dangerous and untrustworthy. You will denounce the Terran hegemony and pledge your loyalty to the Dragon Council. If you do this, I will keep your secret, and you will be allowed to continue your life as before." "And the second choice?" Cale asked, already knowing he would never accept the first. "The second choice is that I expose everything to the Council. I tell them about your collaboration with a human spy. I show them the evidence you have gathered. I present proof that you have been planning to undermine the Council's authority. You will be arrested for treason. You will be executed. Your fortune will be seized by the government. Your son will be taken from you and raised by the state, taught to hate his own father's memory." Vex sat back and smiled. "So what will it be, Cale? Your wealth and your freedom, or your honor and your life?" Cale said nothing for a long moment. Then he activated the communication device on his wrist. "Eleanor, are you there?" Eleanor's voice came through immediately. "I am here, sir." "Execute the plan," Kale commanded. "Now. All of it." Vex's face went pale. He lunged for Kale, but the dragon merchant was faster. Security guards burst through the door, restraining Vex and removing him from the study. Kale had prepared for this possibility. He had anticipated that they would be discovered, and he had a contingency plan in place. Eleanor was already in motion. She had positioned herself in the broadcast center of Aurelian Prime, the most important communication hub in the entire star system. At Kale's signal, she began uploading the evidence of Project Harmony to every network, every channel, every communication system in the galaxy. Within minutes, billions of beings across countless worlds were seeing the files, the recordings, the documents that proved the existence of the program. Kale rushed to the main chamber where Peter was with his tutors. He pulled his son from his lessons and brought him to his private broadcast studio. Peter was confused and frightened, but Kale held him close and explained that they were about to do something very important. The broadcast began simultaneously across the entire galactic network. Kale appeared on screens everywhere, and beside him stood Eleanor, and between them stood young Peter. For the first time, billions of beings saw a dragon and a human standing together as equals, and they saw a young drakeling holding hands with the human who had taught him to dance. Kale spoke clearly and without hesitation. He presented the evidence of Project Harmony. He named the Dragon Council officials who were involved in the program. He described the facilities where humans were being held and modified. He showed recordings of genetic experiments being performed on helpless human subjects. He revealed the true purpose of the program, to eliminate human free will and create a controlled subspecies. The revelation sent shockwaves through the galaxy. Conservative dragons erupted in rage, declaring Kale a traitor to his own kind. But other dragons, especially younger ones and those who had been questioning the Council's authority, began to speak out in support of what Kale had revealed. The Terran hegemony immediately issued statements demanding that all human subjects be released from Project Harmony facilities. They mobilized their military and diplomatic resources, preparing for potential conflict with the Dragon government. The Dragon Council went into emergency session, trying to manage the crisis. Some members attempted to deny the evidence. Others tried to claim that Project Harmony was a necessary security measure. But the truth was already spreading and it could not be stopped. News outlets across the galaxy were analyzing the data, interviewing experts, and revealing more details about the program that had been kept secret for so long. In the midst of the chaos, an assassin appeared in the broadcast studio. No one had anticipated this. The assassin was fast, moving with deadly precision toward Kale. Eleanor saw the weapon being raised and acted without thinking. She threw herself in front of Kale, and the energy weapon struck her instead of the dragon merchant. Eleanor fell to the ground, bleeding from a terrible wound. Peter screamed. Kale caught Eleanor as she collapsed, cradling her in his arms. Security forces rushed in and captured the assassin, but it was too late. Eleanor's eyes were closing, and her breathing was becoming shallow. The last thing she saw before darkness took her was Kale's face and young Peter's terrified expression. "Tell Peter," Eleanor whispered, her voice barely audible, "that I meant every word I said about him. He is going to change this galaxy." Then she lost consciousness, and Kale did not know if she would ever wake up again. The medical team rushed Eleanor to the emergency facility within Kale's fortress, but her condition was critical. The energy weapon had caused severe internal damage, and her human body was not equipped to survive such injuries. Kale stood outside the medical chamber, his large frame trembling with fear and rage. Peter clung to his father's side, tears streaming down the young dragon's face. He kept asking the same question over and over, "Will Eleanor die? Will she die?" Kale did not have an answer. He only knew that the woman who had risked everything, who had sacrificed her own safety to expose the truth, was now lying on a medical table fighting for her life. And it was his fault. He had brought her into this danger. He had agreed to the plan that led to the assassination attempt. Within hours of the broadcast, the Terran hegemony contacted Kale directly. They offered him asylum, protection, and access to their most advanced medical technology. They also offered him something else: recognition as an ally in the fight for human freedom and equality. The human government understood what Kale had done. By publicly exposing Project Harmony and standing alongside Eleanor and his son, Kale had become a symbol. He represented the possibility that change was achievable, that dragons and humans could work together, that the old systems of oppression could be challenged. Human rescue operatives arrived at Kale's fortress within 48 hours. They came not as enemies but as partners. They transported Eleanor, still unconscious, to a human medical vessel orbiting Aurelian Prime. Kale and Peter went with her. As they left the Dragon City for the first time in their lives, Kale realized that he was saying goodbye to everything he had ever known. His fortress, his business empire, his status among dragon nobility, all of it was gone now. The Dragon Council had already issued orders for his arrest on charges of treason. But as Kale watched Peter stare out the viewport at the galaxy beyond, watching his home world shrink into the distance, he felt something unexpected. He felt free. He felt lighter than he had in years, as if he had been carrying an enormous weight that had finally been lifted from his shoulders. The human medical facility was unlike anything Kale had ever seen. It was smaller than dragon medical centers, but it was also more efficient and more focused. The doctors and nurses moved with purpose and precision. When Kale asked about Eleanor's condition, they did not offer false hope or vague reassurances. They told him the truth. Her injuries are severe, the lead doctor, a woman named Victoria, explained. In normal circumstances she would not survive. But we are going to combine human medical technology with dragon healing techniques. We will need genetic material from a dragon who is genetically compatible with her, someone who wants to help her survive. Kale immediately offered his own genetic material. The doctors took samples and began a complex procedure that had never been attempted before. They used advanced human technology to stabilize Eleanor's organs and repair the damage caused by the energy weapon. Simultaneously, they introduced dragon healing factors derived from Kale's own genetics, which accelerated the human healing process and prevented infection. For 3 days, Eleanor remained unconscious. Kale sat beside her medical chamber, watching her breathe, waiting for any sign of improvement. Peter visited several times, holding Eleanor's hand and talking to her, telling her about the things he wanted to show her when she woke up. The young dragon's devotion to the human woman was absolute. He refused to leave the medical facility, and he refused to believe that Eleanor would not recover. On the 4th day, Eleanor's eyes opened. Her first words were weak and confused. "Where am I? What happened?" Kale leaned forward, his massive head filling her field of vision. "You saved my life. You were shot. But you are going to be all right. You are going to survive." Eleanor tried to sit up, but her body was too weak. Kale gently helped her, adjusting her position on the medical bed. Eleanor looked around the unfamiliar chamber, and memories began to return to her. She remembered the assassination attempt. She remembered throwing herself in front of Kale. She remembered the pain. "The broadcast?" she asked urgently. "Did it work? Was the evidence released?" "It worked perfectly," Kale assured her. "The entire galaxy now knows about Project Harmony. The Terran hegemony has declared war on the Dragon government if they do not immediately cease all genetic experiments and release all human prisoners. The Dragon Council is in chaos. There are dragons calling for reform, demanding that the council be restructured. Everything is changing." Eleanor closed her eyes and tears rolled down her cheeks. "We did it. We actually did it." "You did it," Kale corrected. "You risked your life. You sacrificed everything for your people." Over the following weeks, Eleanor recovered steadily. The combination of human and dragon medical treatment proved to be revolutionary. The doctors who worked on her case realized that they had discovered something remarkable, a way to treat injuries that had previously been fatal to humans. Eleanor's recovery inspired hope that similar techniques could be used to help countless other patients. During her recovery, Kale made a decision that shocked the Terran hegemony leadership. He announced that he was liquidating his remaining assets and creating a foundation dedicated to helping human communities recover from the trauma of Project Harmony. He also began working with human and dragon representatives to establish the Covenant of Equals, a political organization dedicated to restructuring galactic power and eliminating species-based hierarchies. Peter spent most of his time with Eleanor during her recovery. He read to her, told her stories, and helped her with her physical therapy. The bond between the young dragon and the human woman deepened into something resembling family love. When Eleanor finally stood on her own 2 feet for the first time since the injury, Peter was there, cheering and celebrating. "What happens now?" Eleanor asked Kale as they stood together watching the sunset from the medical facility's observation deck. "Now," Kale said, looking at his son and then at the woman who had changed their lives, "we build something new. Together. A future where dragons and humans are not enemies but partners." Eleanor placed her hand on Kale's scaled arm. "I never thought I would say this, but I believe in that future. And I believe we can make it real." 1 year had passed since Eleanor's recovery. The galaxy had transformed in ways that few creatures had thought possible. The old Dragon Council had been dissolved, replaced by a new galactic assembly that included representatives from every major species, including humans. For the first time in recorded history, beings of different races sat together as equals, making decisions that affected the entire known universe. Eleanor Price stood in the grand chamber of the assembly, preparing to take her oath as ambassador for interspecies relations. She wore formal human clothing, but beside her stood Kale in his ceremonial dragon robes, and young Peter in garments that honored both human and dragon traditions. Eleanor's hand shook slightly as she raised it to take the oath. A year ago, she had been a spy hiding in a dragon household. Now she was one of the most important political figures in the galaxy. The projects they had started were bearing fruit. Project Harmony had been completely dismantled. All human subjects held in the genetic modification facilities had been released and were receiving medical care and psychological support. The Covenant of Equals, the political organization that Kale had helped establish, had grown to include millions of members from dozens of species. Young dragons and humans were being trained together in schools, learning side by side, building friendships that would shape the future. Kale had become something unexpected, a bridge builder. He used his knowledge of dragon politics and his credibility with conservative dragon factions to negotiate compromises and encourage reform. Many dragons still resisted the changes, still believed that the old hierarchy should be restored. But Kale's voice carried weight. He had sacrificed his own fortune and status for the cause of equality, and that sacrifice earned him respect even from those who disagreed with his politics. Peter had grown into a remarkable young dragon. At only 8 years old, he was already showing signs of the intelligence and compassion that would likely define his generation of dragons. He attended school with human children and had become close friends with several of them. He spoke fluently in both dragon and human languages. Most importantly, he believed in a future where his kind and humans were partners rather than masters and servants. 3 months into Eleanor's role as ambassador, a crisis emerged. A group of extremist dragons calling themselves the Pure Blood Coalition announced that they were preparing a military strike against the new Galactic Assembly. They believed that the changes to dragon society were unnatural and wrong. They wanted to restore the old order even if it meant war. At the same time, a human militant group declared that they would not accept any peace that did not include the complete subjugation of all dragon kind. Violence was brewing on both sides. Eleanor worked frantically with other ambassadors to find a peaceful solution. But time was running out. Intelligence reports suggested that both extremist groups were preparing their attacks simultaneously, planning to create chaos that would destroy the fragile new government before it could take root. The new Galactic Assembly called for a vote on a historic resolution, the formal declaration that all species were equal under galactic law, and that any attempt to establish a hierarchy based on genetics or species type would be considered a crime against all sentient beings. This resolution would legally bind all worlds to a new code of conduct. It would transform everything that had been built over the past year into something permanent and irreversible. The vote was scheduled for the great amphitheater of the assembly, where representatives from thousands of worlds gathered. Security was tight, but everyone knew that determined assassins could potentially get through. Eleanor had received death threats from extremists on both sides. Kale had been warned that his life was in danger, but they refused to hide. This vote was too important. This moment would define the future of the galaxy for generations to come. Peter begged to attend the vote. He wanted to stand with his father and Eleanor, to show the galaxy that the next generation of dragons supported equality. After much discussion, Kale and Eleanor agreed. They brought Peter to the amphitheater, and he stood between them on the central platform where the ambassadors were gathered. The vote proceeded smoothly for the first hour. Representatives rose one by one to declare their support for the resolution. The count climbed higher and higher. It seemed that they were going to succeed, that this historic declaration would pass with overwhelming support. Then the attack came. Extremists from both sides had coordinated their actions. Assassins appeared throughout the amphitheater, armed with bioweapons designed to exploit the genetic differences between species. A dragon extremist threw a device that released a cloud of particles specifically engineered to attack human nervous systems. A human militant activated a weapon that released toxins deadly to dragon physiology. Chaos erupted. Representatives screamed and ran for safety. Guards rushed forward to protect the ambassadors. But in that moment of confusion, Peter did something that would be remembered for the rest of his life. The young dragon saw the spreading cloud of toxic particles moving toward the human section of the assembly. Without hesitation, without thinking about his own safety, Peter placed himself directly in the path of the toxins. His young dragon body could withstand what would kill humans, but it was still dangerous. He coughed and gasped as the particles entered his lungs, his eyes watering from the chemical burn. Eleanor saw what was happening and rushed to Peter's side, pulling him away from the toxic cloud. Cale roared a sound that shook the amphitheater, a sound of rage and protective fury that galvanized the security forces. They moved with deadly precision, neutralizing the extremists before more damage could be done. Peter was rushed to medical care, but his injuries were minor compared to what they could have been. He had protected the human representatives, and in doing so he had demonstrated something that no speech or political document could achieve. He had shown that dragons and humans truly could care for each other, truly could sacrifice for each other, truly could be family. As Peter recovered in the medical chamber, he looked up at Eleanor and asked her to continue the vote. The assembly reconvened the following day. The resolution passed with 98% support. It became the most important law in galactic history. 5 years later, Cale stood in a garden on Aurelian Prime, teaching a group of young humans and draglings to dance together. The children laughed as they learned the steps that Eleanor had once taught Peter. Cale watched them move with joy and freedom, and he thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment. He thought about Eleanor risking everything as a spy. He thought about the moment he had decided to help her. He thought about Peter protecting his human friends. The sun set over the city, casting long shadows across the dance floor. In that garden, in that moment, the future was alive and real. Dragons and humans danced together, moving as one, building a new world where equality was not just a law but a lived reality. And in the hearts of all who watched, there was hope that this future would continue to grow, that the new dawn they had fought so hard to achieve would never fade.